They removed my name from the opening slide. That was the first sign. It was not dramatic. No email, no announcement. Just a quiet shift. My name, my role, gone from the presentation I had spent 6 months building. Slide by slide, chart by chart, it had been mine. I knew every margin, every projection, every comparative model inside out. I had rewritten it 3 times to match the client's shifting priorities. I had sat with their procurement lead for hours to understand how they evaluated vendors. I had done the homework no one else wanted to do, and now I was not even invited to the meeting. My name is James Talcott. I am not the loudest person in the room. I do not push people out of the way to get credit. I never had to. The work spoke for itself until it did not. When the calendar invite went out, I was not included. At first, I thought it was an oversight. The meeting title was vague. Client Sync, Final Presentation. I clicked it again, then checked who was on it. Our client's leadership team, our own managing director, our senior consultant, our operations liaison, and 3 people from my department, not me. I refreshed the page, still nothing. I sent a brief message to one of the coordinators. No accusations, just a simple, "Hey, I noticed I'm not on the calendar for the presentation. Let me know if I should be?" I did not get a response that day or the next. The thing about being methodical, about being the person who makes sure everything is airtight, is that people tend to forget you are there until something breaks. The day before the presentation, I walked past the team conference room. I saw the dry erase board with the client's name scrawled across it in rough notes, delivery strategy, cost value summary, Phase 2 timelines. All phrases I had introduced in earlier drafts. One of my colleagues glanced up, then looked away quickly. That moment told me everything. I went home that night and sat in front of my laptop. The last version of the deck was open. I had sent it in 2 weeks earlier. I had not seen any edits since. They were presenting my work. Without me. And I knew exactly why. 3 weeks earlier, during a late review session, I pushed back on a cost figure that had been rounded down to make it look more favorable. It was not accurate. The raw numbers were off by nearly $600,000 over the project life. I flagged it. The conversation got tense. I insisted it be corrected. It was not corrected. I do not think that moment went unnoticed, and I do not think it was forgiven, but I did not say anything. I let it go, until I saw that I had been quietly erased from the meeting that would finalize the largest project our team had handled in nearly 2 years, an $8.2 million proposal, built brick by brick, spreadsheet by spreadsheet on my laptop. The next morning, I arrived at the office early. I did not go to the conference room. I did not barge in or make a scene. I went to my desk, opened my laptop, and logged into the shared drive. I watched the meeting in silence from the feed that was set up for clients who could not be there in person. It was not public-facing, but it was live. I had access from a prior meeting setup. No one had revoked it. They were 20 minutes in when I heard something that stopped me cold. The client's technical director leaned forward and asked, "Who developed the data models for your rollout simulations?" There was silence. One of my teammates hesitated. The team collaborated on all major components. The client did not buy it. I am asking because we ran a shadow model on our end, and whoever built yours nailed our failure tolerances exactly. That does not happen by accident. Another pause. A shuffle of papers, then the managing director spoke. That would be, from within our internal analytics team, no name, no credit, just internal. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. There it was. But then, something changed. About 15 minutes later, the client asked a question so specific, so deeply technical, that I knew, without hesitation, that no one in that room would be able to answer it properly, because I had written the original analysis, and I had never shared that specific logic with anyone else. The client's voice was calm. "Can you explain how you accounted for the variance in utility degradation during Stage 3, particularly when it overlaps with phase transition costs?" That sentence landed like a grenade in a silent room. There was a long pause. Someone began flipping through notes. Then someone else said, "We would be happy to follow up on that in writing." The client was quiet for a moment. I'd prefer to hear it now. Then came the question that changed everything. "Is James Talcott in the room?" It was not shouted, it was not dramatic, it was direct, and it shattered whatever illusion they had built. I sat motionless. Someone on our side stammered, "James was involved earlier in the process, but not now?" the client asked. Another pause. "I want him in the room," the client said. That sentence did more for my career than all my quarterly reviews combined. An assistant came rushing down the hall. I knew before she spoke what she was going to say. She found me sitting at my desk, already dressed for the meeting. "They're asking for you in the main conference room." I stood up slowly, nodded once, and followed her down the hall. And in that moment, with every step I took, I realized something. Being excluded was not the worst thing that had happened to me. Being remembered was. The walk from my desk to that conference room was not long, maybe 30 paces. But every one of those steps felt like its own conversation. It was not just about being asked in, it was what it meant, what it revealed, that the client noticed, that the work had been mine, that silence could only hold for so long before the truth seeped through the cracks. When I walked in, the room went quiet. The managing director gave a nod, half smile, the kind that people wear when they are improvising. The rest of the team looked anywhere but at me, and the client, seated across the long table, leaned back in his chair with a small, contained expression. Satisfaction, maybe, or something closer to confirmation. He pointed to the seat across from him. "Mr. Talcott, correct?" I nodded. "That is right." He turned a page on the printout. "You built the simulation model for Phase 3 utility interaction?" "Yes, including the transitional cost overlays and long-tail maintenance curve. I used a normalized data set based on your existing infrastructure forecasts, but I also modeled 2 alternative paths with different assumptions, in case your system upgrades come in under expected thresholds." There was a moment of pause. Then he smiled. "That is exactly what we picked up on." I could feel the tension shift in the room, not from the client, but from my own side of the table. This was not how the presentation was supposed to go. Not for them. The managing director cleared his throat. "James has been a valued contributor to the early phases of the proposal development." "Contributor?" the client interrupted. "Your entire analytics section appears to be built on his modeling. You realize that?" The silence that followed was not the awkward kind, it was the kind that uncovers things. I did not say anything. I did not need to. The rest of the presentation went forward with me at the table. They deferred to me 3 more times. Each time, it was for something technical, layered, precise. Not one question was about messaging or narrative. Every question was about function, delivery, integrity, and every time I answered, it landed. By the end of the meeting, the client stood up and reached across the table. "Thank you, Mr. Talcott. I hope we will continue seeing you on this project." That was the moment. It did not come with applause. It did not need to. After they left, the room deflated. My team avoided eye contact. The managing director gave a brief nod and said, "Good work," before stepping out without waiting for a reply. I stayed behind, alone in the room. I sat back down and looked at the deck on the screen. My deck. Every slide had my fingerprints on it, but the authorship, that had been erased. At least until the client asked the one question they could not fake. I should have been angry, but I was not. Not exactly. What I felt was clearer than that. There is a difference between disappointment and clarity, and that day gave me the second. Over the next 2 days, I kept to myself. I did not push for credit. I did not demand recognition. I did not send a follow-up email thanking the client for the mention. I simply went back to work. But something had changed. Quietly, the requests started coming in. One from procurement, asking for clarification on the cost staging. Another from logistics, asking for my opinion on delivery sequences. Then one from the client's own project analyst, asking if I would be the ongoing technical point of contact. None of those requests went through the people who excluded me. They came to me directly. And that, more than anything, told me what I needed to know. A week later, I was called into a meeting with the regional director. Not someone I spoke to often, not someone who typically gets involved unless the numbers are very large or the politics are very messy. He was polite. "Director, I reviewed the presentation and I reviewed the meeting transcript. It is clear you played a central role." I nodded. "Yes, I did. I also noticed your name was missing from all official documentation." "Yes." He sat back, folded his hands. "You did not escalate. I did not want to. I wanted the work to speak for itself." There was a pause. Then he said, "Well, it did." He offered me an option, a formal recognition on the record, with added responsibilities moving forward. I would not replace anyone, but I would now be the primary liaison for the analytics stream. The internal title would be upgraded. Compensation would follow. It was subtle, quiet, professional, but it was real. Still, I had one question. If the client had not asked, would any of this have happened? He looked me in the eye and said, "Probably not." That was the honesty I appreciated more than the offer, because I had known it all along. In the months that followed, the project moved forward. I was now CC'd on every email that mattered. I was in the room for every checkpoint. But the team that had pushed me out? They had become background noise, polite, careful, like people who had learned what not to try again, but only because it had backfired. I did not hold a grudge, but I did not forget. I just watched. Carefully. And then, 3 months in, I saw something that caught my attention. A new internal deck was circulating, a proposal for another high-profile client. I opened it. On the second slide, I saw something familiar, too familiar, a framework I had created, renamed, but otherwise untouched. Someone was using my work again, quietly. And this time, I plan to handle it differently. There are moments in your career when the choices are no longer about ambition or opportunity. They are about principle, quiet ones, the kind you carry with you even when no one else notices, or maybe especially when no one notices. Seeing my framework inside that new pitch deck was one of those moments. They had changed the title, adjusted the formatting, but I knew my work, down to the structure of the logic flow, down to the exact way the margin notes were styled. It was mine, just not with my name on it. Again. But unlike the last time, this one did not carry the same sting. It carried a different weight. I had already seen what happened when I stayed quiet. This time, I did not. I sent a short, direct message to the strategy director. "Hi, reviewed the draft deck for the new client. The framework on slide 2 through 5 is identical to the modular staging model I authored last quarter. Let me know how you would like to attribute or revise before this moves forward. No accusations, no tone, just facts. The response was almost immediate. Let me loop in the team and get clarity. Appreciate you flagging. Clarity. That was the word people used when they needed to buy time. But it did something more important. It changed the power dynamic. Because now they knew I had eyes on it, and I had the history to back it up. The next day, I was pulled into a call, 4 people, none of whom had invited me to that original $8.2 million presentation. They were careful, measured. It started with pleasantries. Then the phrase I expected. There appears to have been some overlap between prior work and the new structure we are proposing. Overlap. I stayed calm. It is not overlap, it is a direct port. Look at the metadata. I authored the base files. I can pull up version history if needed. They knew. I knew. And the conversation pivoted. We would like to bring you informally on this next engagement. Of course they would. But I had one question of my own this time. Who placed that framework in the deck without attribution? Silence. Then a careful answer. It was initially compiled by a junior associate, possibly without full context. That was the answer they settled on, a junior associate. It always was. Someone too new to push back, too quiet to defend themselves, and too far removed to be the one actually making the decision. I let the answer hang, then said, "Going forward, I will participate only under clear authorship terms. I want written documentation of role assignments on any asset using my models, and I want them archived." They agreed, quickly, almost too quickly. This was not about credit anymore. It was about making sure the same thing did not happen again. At least, not in silence. By now, things had changed for me. After the presentation meeting months earlier, my relationship with the client had grown direct. We had calls without intermediaries. They asked for my input, not my team's, mine, and they trusted me. It showed when they awarded the second contract. Another 7-figure deal, and this time my name was on every document from day one. But internally, things were less stable. The managing director who once dismissed me had become cautious, tense even. He started showing up to meetings I was leading, offering feedback on decks I had already finalized, subtle ways of asserting control, but it was too late. My influence was no longer dependent on his approval. It came from delivery, from results, from the trust I had built directly with the people who mattered. And with every passing week, the structure of the team began to shift. Slowly, but surely. One afternoon, I was pulled into a meeting with senior operations. It was informal, off calendar, but not unimportant. They wanted to understand why my work was landing with clients in ways the broader teams was not. I told them the truth. I build solutions for real problems, not for performance metrics, not to hit slide counts, just to solve what is actually there. They nodded, asked me what I would change if I could. I gave them a list. Nothing dramatic, just small structural shifts. Fewer hands in the approval chain. Clearer ownership. Accountability tied to delivery, not optics. A month later, half those changes were implemented. Quietly, without credit, but they were mine. I did not need the memo to say it. I could see it in the way things began to move faster, smarter, cleaner. And then, one morning, I walked in to find that the managing director, the same one who once sidelined me from my own presentation, was no longer with the firm. No announcement, just a reassignment. Lateral, but out of our division. I did not smile. I did not celebrate. I just got back to work. Because somewhere along the way, I stopped needing vindication. I stopped needing them to say I had been right. All I needed was the space to do what I knew how to do. Building solve, deliver. Looking back, I think about that first moment, seeing the meeting invite without my name, watching the team try to walk into that room without the person who built the core of it all. And I think about what would have happened if the client had not asked the one question. Would I still be sitting here, doing work that belonged to someone else, under someone else's banner? Probably. But they did ask, and everything that followed, every moment of restraint, every decision not to lash out, not to gloat, not to retaliate, was built on that one question that cracked the whole thing open. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. Who built this? And when the answer finally pointed to me, everything started to change. Not quickly, not loudly, but fully. Now, every project I touch carries my name, not because I fought for it, but because I earned it. Over time, over results, over silence. That is how you build something real. One answer at a time.